welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host, under the heading of Change and the Abusive Person, referencing Lundy Bancroft's book, of course. Why does he do that? Inside the minds of angry and controlling men. First, I'd like to show you the newest addition to the family. Meet Hero. This is a baby dog. Hero? He's scared. He's a big dog. Look at him. Oh, big old dog. Hero? Look at those ears.
Hero.
This will be part 2 of The Abusive Person in Couples Therapy. We covered the first part of this in the previous video. Bancroft begins by telling us he had read a professional book recently that gave a powerful example of how couples therapy works with an abusive person. The therapist made an agreement with the couple involved that the man would avoid his spooky behaviors, and in return the lady would stop making her friends such an important part of her life, in quotes, because her friendships were causing so much tension in the marriage. In this circumstance, the therapist had actually assisted the man in using the threat of violence in order to get his way, cutting his partner off from social connections and sources of support that were important to her. What the therapist portrayed as a voluntary agreement was actually coercion, although the authors of the book showed no signs of realizing this. It also indicates isolation. He doesn't want her to have access to her friends who might talk some sense into her about him. Bancroft also tells us that couples counseling can end up being a setback for the abused party. The more she insists that her partner's cruelty or intimidation needs to be addressed, the more she may find the therapist looking down upon her, saying things like,
Well, it seems that you're determined to put all the blame on him, and you're refusing to look into your part in this.
The therapist thereby inadvertently echoes the abusive person's attitudes, and the lady is forced to deal with yet another context in which she has to defend herself, which is the last thing she needs. Bancroft says he's been involved in lots of cases where the therapist and the abusive person ended up as kind of a tag team, and the abused lady limped away from yet another psychological assault. Most therapists in such circumstances are well-intentioned but fail to understand the dynamics of abuse, and they allow the abusive person to shape their perceptions. And I know this is true. I've experienced it before, too. The therapist's reassuring presence in the room can give you the courage to open up to your partner in ways that you wouldn't normally feel comfortable or safe doing, but this isn't necessarily positive. An abusive person can retaliate for a lady's frank statements during couple sessions. Later, when he's screaming at you,
You made a fool of me in front of that therapist. You made me look like the bad guy, and you told her things that were too private.
delivering a non-stop diatribe, you may regret your decision to open up in the first place. Irene, who's an abused lady who tells her own story in public and has appeared on several panels with Mr. Bancroft, shares the following account. She was going to couples counseling for about 6 months with her husband, Quentin, and then one day the therapist decided it was time to get the ball rolling. He had said,
These sessions have gradually stopped going anywhere, and I think I know why, Irene. You're not opening up very much, and I think you need to take more emotional risks.
Irene felt the therapist was right. She had been exposing very little week to week, so she decided to take the plunge. She told the therapist about Quentin's abuse of her, which included considerable physical violence and the downward emotional spiral she'd been in as a result. Quentin appeared moved and shaken. His eyes turned bright red, as if he might cry at any second.
I've really been in denial about my violence,
He told the therapist.
and I haven't been facing how badly it's been affecting poor Irene.
The therapist felt that a crucial barrier to progress had finally been overcome. Now, he declared, I think your couple's work can begin to yield some positive results for you. On the drive home from the session, Quentin kept one hand on the steering wheel, and in the other he clutched a large handful of Irene's hair as he repeatedly slammed her head against the dashboard, screaming,
I told you never blank and talk to anyone about that, you blank. You promised me, you blanking liar.
and similar insults in a non-stop rant. After hearing Irene's account, Bancroft was careful to never again underestimate the risk to an abused lady in co-joint therapy. If couples counseling is the only type of help your partner is willing to get because he wants to make sure that he can blame the problem on you, you may think, well, it's better than not getting any counseling at all. Maybe the therapist will see things he does and convince him to get help. But even if the therapist were to confront him, which is not very common, he would just say,
"Oh, you turn the therapist against me."
The same way it handles any other challenges. Some couples therapists have said to Bancroft, "Before I work with a couple whose relationship has involved abuse, I insist on clear agreements that there won't be any abuse while they're in therapy with me, and no paybacks for anything that gets said in the session." Such agreements are meaningless, unfortunately, because the abusive person feels no obligation to honor them. Virtually every single abuser Bancroft has worked with feels entitled to break its word if it has a good enough reason, which includes any time that it's really upset by the partner. Increasingly, therapists across the United States and Canada are refusing to engage in couples or family sessions with an abusive person, which is the responsible course of action to take. Next, we cover the abusive person in individual therapy. The more psychotherapy a client of Bancroft has participated in, the more impassable he usually finds it to work with this person. The highly therapized abuser tends to be slick, condescending, and manipulative. He uses the psychological concepts that he's learned in his sessions to dissect the partner's flaws and dismiss her perceptions as abuse. He takes responsibility for nothing that he does. He moves in a world where there are only unfortunate dynamics, miscommunications, symbolic acts. He expects to be rewarded for his emotional openness, handled gingerly because of the fact he's so vulnerable, colluded with in skirting the damage he's done, and congratulated for his insight. Many years ago, a violent, abusive person in Bancroft's program shared the following with the group.
From working in therapy on my issues about anger towards my mother, I realized that when I punched my wife, it really wasn't her I was punching. It was my mother.
He sat back, ready for us to express our approval of his self-awareness. Bancroft's colleague peered through his glasses at the man, unimpressed by this revelation. "No," he said, "you were hitting your wife." Bancroft says that he has yet to meet an abusive person who's made any meaningful and lasting changes in its behavior towards female partners through therapy. Regardless of how much insight, most of it is fake, that he may have gained. The fact is that if an abusive person finds a particularly skilled therapist, and if the therapy is especially successful, when he's done, he will be a happy, well-adjusted, abusive person. Good news for him, perhaps, but not such good news for the partner. Psychotherapy can be very valuable for the issues it is devised to address, but partner abuse is not one of them. An abusive person needs to be in a specialized program, as we shall soon see. The next video covers the abusive program, or the abuser program.
I am the narcopath.
I know when I checked back into your old hometown and talked to some of your friends and heard some of the stuff you've been saying about me, you found out about it and you were worried I was going to do something about it to hurt you. Well, honey, don't worry your ugly little head about it, because, quite frankly, you were doing me a favor. Basically, it just sounded like you were smearing my name, which is what I typically do to my target. Thanks. You were just smearing my name because I told them a completely different story, and I warned them you'd probably try to make something up, such as, and I said some of the things that I did do, because I knew you'd tell it, because you and your truthfulness, makes me sick. I only tell the truth if it helps my case. If the truth doesn't help me, honey, it's going to be changed into a lie. I knew how to play it. I knew what you'd say. Who else would? I'm the one who did it. But they didn't need to know that. And they didn't believe you. They believed me.
Fine, since we're talking about your brother.
I didn't cover everything about him. Remember when we lived together? And he told you he was down on his luck and needed a place to stay? I knew that would get you because you knew I was living with you, and you knew if he was there, it might cause some kind of trouble. Of course, you expressed that and said, I don't want my brother being here with you there. You might flirt with him, and I assured you, oh, honey, there's no way. He's not my type. You're my type. You're the only one I want to be with forever. I thought you were buying it. I don't know if you were or not. The point was all this was orchestrated. And then when he came to you and begged you, I put on a little act and called him a loser and screamed at him and threw my high heel at him. That convinced you, and you let him move in. I knew that you were getting to be kind of boring, kind of vanilla. Your brother was a completely different type than you. So I knew I had to get rid of you. But I wanted your house, I wanted your video games, I wanted your fancy TV and stereo, and I wanted your brother. The only thing in the way was you. So remember that night that you were speeding and the policeman stopped us and found some contraband in your car? And you said, I don't know where that came from. Oh, and I laughed because you really didn't, but the policeman thought you were playing. You got hauled off to jail. Of course, I acted devastated. My mind was on what your brother and I were going to do as soon as I got back to the boom boom room. You thought I was on your side. It worked. We had the most romantic night in your bed. Oh, those stains on there in a heart shape? Guilty. But you deserve it again. You shouldn't make me work in the beginning. You should just believe me and go along with everything. Love me back.